Hello, my name is Matt. Welcome to Unbearable 73. So you can see by the topic what we're talking about. The news today that the Saul Zaentz group has sold their rights to a group called the Embracer Organization, which is a video game, company rights for the most part. So we've known for a while the Saul Zaentz group has been trying to sell their rights package, which they've held since 1976. Back then, Saul Zaentz wanted to start his own movie studio, so he purchased the rights that United Artists had, because United Artists was planning on making a Lord of the Rings film, and that fell through. Now, a historical note on that: UA spent a lot of money putting together costume sets and so on to do this Lord of the Rings film. John Borman had tried to sell UA on doing his project that ultimately became the movie Excalibur, but they tried to get him to take over Lord of the Rings and he didn't want to do Excalibur. Borman refused and moved on. Eventually, when the Lord of the Rings project lost momentum, UA picked up Borman's Excalibur and wound up using all those costume sets and armors on filming the actual Excalibur. So you can kind of see what would have been the effort that would have been put into Lord of the Rings in the 70s had United Artists been able to move forward with it. Now, the Saul Zaentz group, after they purchased these rights and many other media rights, eventually isolated all the Tolkien rights into a sub corporation which they eventually renamed Middle Earth Enterprises. Um, and as I said, so the Saul Zaentz Group initially started as a movie studio. You might have heard of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, for example. Eventually, they just became one of many rights management organizations. Now, there are essentially less than 10 corporations that control the bulk of media rights in the U.S. You might have heard of them like Disney, Comcast, National Amusements, which kind of eventually became Paramount. I have a couple of videos on that from a while back if you're curious about it. Sony and others. The Saul Zaentz Group and Embracer are not on that scale or on that list. There are other rights still out there that are held by smaller companies, just so people are aware of that. But it's all scaling up, okay? Variety reported in an article that I linked to below back in February that the Saul Zaentz Group had hired ACF Investment Bank to handle this sale. So it's been on sale since February, right? Both the Saul Zaentz Group and ACF declined any commentary at the time, but the rumor was they were asking for $2 billion. There have also been rumors that the Saul Zaentz Group and the Tolkien estate have been upset to the point of legal action that Warner has not made any more Lord of the Rings films or TV shows based on the rights that they had. Note that Amazon got their TV deal because there was a loophole in the rights that the Saul Zaentz Group had, which didn't cover the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, and that's all that Amazon has. There's been some reporting that live-action rights have reverted back to Warner, from Warner back to the Zaentz Group. I have a link to a news story from Dark Horizons that mentioned that below, and I have I'll make some further comments with the more in-depth article that I mentioned later. Okay? It might be the case, if this is true, that's why the Saul Zaentz Group put the Middle Earth Enterprise up for sale right around now. The timing makes sense. Amazon's Rings of Prime is set to debut in order to dishonor the date of Tolkien's death on September 2nd, 2022. Technically, overnight on September 1st is the actual drop date. Had this crap show been a likely success, the optimum time to sell probably would have been in the weeks right after it dropped. But given the massive fan backlash to this coming crap show, it makes more sense that this would be the peak in value for Middle Earth Enterprises for probably the next 2 to 3 years, meaning that Amazon's Rings of Prime is going to devalue the brand that the Saul Zaentz Group has, and they figured that out. Okay. It should be noted that Saul Zaentz himself died in 2014, so this is basically his heirs managing his estate, so to speak. Also, the Variety article specifies that in the rights setup that the Zaentz Group had, and I quote from an article, the Zaentz Group holding encompasses the rights to exploit Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit properties in film, video games, merchandising, live events, and theme parks. It also includes limited matching rights should the Tolkien estate decide to make movies or other content based on 2 compilations of Tolkien's writings that were published after his death in 1973, The Silmarillion and The Unfinished Tales of Numenor and Middle-earth. Variety also reported that Warner had forfeited the live-action rights back to Saul Zaentz Group in 2021 because they had stopped actively developing any live content based on The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. Variety also further mentions that there's legal contention over this. Okay, I've mentioned in some of the videos before that the Zaentz Group, the Tolkien estate, and Warner were contemplating a 3-way legal war over these rights. And you may have heard that Warner is almost done with the War of the Rohirrim, an animated movie. Right? The Variety article also speculated, along with others, reporting on that Amazon's $1 billion investment in Rings of Prime was a precursor to them throwing money at these rights from the Saul Zaentz group so that Amazon could redo The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and anything else they wanted. That's been my thoughts for months on this, that Amazon really didn't care if the show did well. I mean, they know there's gonna be a million people that watch it no matter what. It's on Prime. You're on Prime. I'll give this a shot. You watch first couple episodes, and Amazon's, oh, look, we got all this massive streaming rights, and that justifies their sale. That's been their logic. They really wanted to associate the concept of Amazon and Lord of the Rings in the viewer's head. So when they eventually bid on these rights, which they no longer can now, I'll speculate on my final closing, which they can no longer get control of because they can't buy Middle-earth Enterprises. But the idea of having been able to associate the branding, it was best a branding campaign. That's why they built that giant studio, for this show. I linked both the Embracer and Amazon Wikipedia pages because on the right side they show the financial scale, the finances for the companies. And you can see that Amazon vastly outpowers Embracer when it comes to financial resources. So why did Embracer get these rights? Well, here's some speculation on my part. But since the Saul Zaentz group is privately held, and Saul Zaentz, from everything we know, was someone who respected the property's license to varying degrees, the group managing the estate did not have to take the highest bid, but rather who they felt could best manage the rights respectively, both from a financial and historical point of view. The MSN article speculates that the Lord of the Rings rights should have sold for far more. I mentioned $2 billion earlier in the Variety article. It is, as I said, did the Zaentz group take less, or that Amazon had devalued those rights? We'll never know, to be honest. I'm not old enough to. I'm too old to know, because by the time someone writes a book about this in 20 or 30 years, I'm not likely to be around. It's important to understand Tolkien's works start entering the public domain in the late 2030s, so this is likely the last chance for almost anyone to make big money on this. Right? So where does this leave us? First, we have to see a resolution between Middle-earth Enterprises and Warner's dispute over whether Warner has lost the live-action film rights. If and when that's resolved, I will bet with the failure of Amazon's Rings to Prime, that we will see another set of Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies in the late 2020s. Possibly, depending on the TV show rights go, we might even see TV show versions, which to me would be preferable, like 10-episode seasons and whatever, to really show the scale that Tolkien built into this. If there's one major, there's a couple of criticisms I have of the movies, but one of the major ones is they didn't show the war going on. Second, anyone who thinks that Amazon is not doing all 5 seasons of this crap show are deceiving themselves. They basically already paid for it. The only way we won't see all 5 seasons completed is if the actors' contracts are not for all 5 of those seasons. Third, does this mean that Tolkien's Legendarium is not protected from wokeism? Hardly. The only gratifying sign is that the Tolkien estate still has not licensed out the Silmarillion or the Unfinished Tales, which means that there are at least some of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren who still respect his work. Fourth, the largest result coming from this sale is that you will see a lot of video games coming from this, and I mean a lot. I fully expect at least 10, maybe even 20 different video games over the next 7 or 8 years. This makes me sad, kind of, because my arthritis makes playing video games kind of problematic for me at this point in life. Lastly, for this article, I expect Tolkien theme parks to become a serious thing. You'll see Disney, Universal, and any other company who runs theme parks to throw money at the Embracer Group's Middle-earth Enterprises. So, all that long way to talk, it boils down to this. What should you do? Number 1, make sure you have actual physical copies of all Tolkien's works. Right now, pretty much everything he's ever written, which have been out of print, is coming up for a new round of prints. Good opportunities there. Just don't get the crappy Amazon, brings a power covers, for example, for the trilogy. Also, people are flooding eBay and similar sites with their older Tolkien stuff. You can get some nice buys there. I don't know if you can see this, but this is the second edition of the songbook Tolkien did, which has the songs that Tolkien himself wrote. It's called The Road Was Ever On, which is the song Bilbo sang at the Grey Havens, and with actual music by a real composer. And I wanted the third because there's another song in the third edition that's not in the second edition, but I'm happy to have gotten this. I had a kind of paper, like a cheapo. I don't think it was a legit copy. It was more like a musical score book. I don't think this has ever been published in that format. Meaning, this has the musical score in it, but I mean, the paper covers, you would get your old guitar magazine. Not that I can play an instrument, or I tried when I was a kid, but I really dig this sort of stuff. The level of depth that Tolkien put into it. There's a lot. I have other stuff I could point out that's kind of buried right now. Anyway. Second, read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and other works. Read them to and with your children. Expose them to the actual Legendarium. And honestly, that's true for other stuff. I had some relatives who read stuff to me, and it wasn't all fantasy stuff, but I appreciated that. Make sure you have good Blu-rays of the theatrical versions of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. As much as I can find some faults in them, the theatrical versions are still respectful adaptations that are worth watching several times, all of which should have won an Oscar. Every year those films should have won the Oscar. They were the best picture every year they were out. As far as the extended edition go, Two Towers extended edition is the least worst. I think the flaws from both an adaptation point of view and changing the lore a bit too much show up more in the extended editions. Though there are some awesome scenes in the extended editions too. Just, like I said, you can get both. Just make sure you have the theatricals. Right? For The Hobbit, I'm going to recommend you actually get, again, all the editions as well, but then find a fan edit. There are ways with your Blu-ray players, or if you rip this to your home media player, where you can set timings so you cut things out. Because there's basically a 3.5 hour to 4 hour film in that 7 hours of Hobbit film, or 8 hours of Hobbit film, that's actually fairly decent. Okay. Now, nextly, I should say, get yourself copies of the animated movie from the 70s. Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings is still my favorite adaptation of Lord of the Rings. I watched it again. I watched it probably at least once a year, usually. The Rankin Bass Hobbit and Return of the King are very good, entertaining, although they are a bit less respectful to Tolkien's work. The music, however, is memorable, and the great John Huston is the voice of Gandalf. I'll always hear his voice in my head for that reason. Finally, remain vigilant. It looks like corporations have finally realized that get woke, go broke is a real thing and not just a protest by an internet minority. Thanks for listening to me. Comment down below if you have any questions for me about this video. Please share your thoughts. Share this video if you enjoyed it. Like if you like. Dislike if you dislike. Subscribe if you want to hear more from me. My name is Matt. This has been Unbearable 73. Have a nice day, and I am out of here.